Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Purva and today I'm going to integrate Webpack to my React application. My focus will be just integrating Webpack to our project. It combines bundling and building into one tool, made it easier to configure. It was released in 2014 and since then there are many bundles like Rollup, White, Snowpack that have been released and they successfully resolve some or other problems with Webpack. I'm working on the assumption that if you're here, you want to integrate Webpack in your React application, and we are going to do it together. If you want to learn some other Webpack, or if you want to learn which one is better, I'm sure there are a lot of internet tutorials available. You can use them for your research, or we can do it in some other video. Tell me in the comment section. That would be interesting. Anyways, before we begin, probably just one sentence around what Webpack is to understand its mechanism, what it does. Webpack analyzes your application. It creates a dependency graph that keeps track of all your application dependencies, right? And this dependency graph includes all the modules in your application that your application depends on and their dependencies, non-core assets like images, web fonts, etc. Without wasting any further time, let's start. For this, you'll need a React project. If you don't have one, create a project for yourself. Install some dependencies. First, you should have React DOM and React, of course. I have both of them. If you don't have them, use the command npm install react, npm install react DOM, and you should be good to go. Next few dependencies that you need are Webpack, Webpack CLI, Webpack dev server. Open the terminal and go to your project directory. Run this command npm install. Save these dependencies in dev. Like I said, Webpack, Webpack CLI, and Webpack dev server. Let's wait for a minute while it installs the dependencies. Dependencies are installed. You need to install some other dependencies with respect to Babel. Babel loader, Babel core, Babel preset n, and Babel preset react. Let's install it. Babel is a very popular JavaScript transpiler that allows us to write ES6 plus code and convert into a version that is compatible with old browsers. So we can use the new JavaScript language features while maintaining support for old browsers and environments. Cool. While I was telling you that, this is done. All the dependencies are installed. Now let's configure Webpack and Babel in our VS Code. Go to your VS Code and create a webpack.config.js file in your project's root directory. So let's do that. Webpack config.js. Cool. We simply need to add some configuration that is related to Webpack. This might take a bit of time, so I might skip few minutes. Simply write them down and I'll get back once it is ready. Okay, my config.js is done. Before we begin, let's try to understand some basic concepts of Webpack, what you need to configure before you jump into other configurations. Entry. Entry means entry point to your application. Simply, it defines which file to begin building out its internal dependency graph to Webpack. By default, it is set to src index.js. So make sure that you have index.js file in your source folder. React creates an index.js file by default when you create an application. Make sure that you have it there and it is not lost anywhere. Otherwise, this won't work. Output means once your entry file is correctly set in Webpack, this will analyze the code in your entry file, look up for all the dependencies, and then you are telling Webpack that you want it to deploy it in this folder and compile our code into a bundle.js file. You can name it as main.js, bundle.js, as you like. Then you might want to define some rule inside module. In my experience, this has been very useful, and if you want to use Webpack to its full capacity, you might want to add some rules around what kind of files that you want to use for tests, what folders do you want to exclude. If you're using symlinks or if you're using monorepo, this is very useful. Loaders, by default, Webpack supports only JavaScript and JSON files, but you can use loaders like Babel loader to pre-process other non-JavaScript files for older browsers, compatibility, TypeScript, CSS, HTML, and so on. Then you want to add the extensions that you want your Webpack to resolve. In my case, JS and JSX. If you have TypeScript, you might want to add that. Later, I added dev server, the path to this folder as a content base, and the port, of course. There are some other configurations which are not needed in the beginning. If we need that, we will add that later. But for now, this looks good for me. Thing that you want to do is create a .babelrc file in your project's root, which will include presets configuration, like which library that you want Webpack to use for resolving the older browser versions. In our case, we install Babel preset ANV library and Babel preset React. So make sure that you have it there. Last thing to build, in your package.json, we will change the start script from React script start to Webpack serve. Now let's go to the terminal and simply run npm star, and let's see what happens. As you can see, we ran into this error. Dev server has been initialized using options object that does not match the API schema. Options has an unknown property content base. Of course, why? Because if you go to package.json and see which Webpack is installed, this is version 5 above. You might notice if you go to the documentation that content base has been deprecated in Webpack version 5. Let's fix this. Before we move any further, I made certain changes in a package.json library. For the start script, I'm going to use Webpack serve, and in addition, I'm going to pass the config over here. Same for build. I am going to use Webpack config file is at this location. That's about package.json. Another warning before we move ahead, we are not going to jump into solution directly. I would rather fix each warning, each error one by one, step-by-step resolution. At the end, you will see that we are able to compile our React application successfully with Webpack. Let's see what all errors we run into. First one is this one. Because content base is deprecated, what we need to do is we go back to webpack config.js file, and here we need to remove content base, and instead of this we need to use the static parameter over here. So static takes another parameter called directory, where you pass the path. Another thing that we did wrong over here, instead of passing the path of public directory in static, we passed this, which won't work, because in React case, when you build a React application, all the public assets go inside public directory. So we need to choose public. Okay, let's try to run it again. Now you see that your project is running successfully, but if you open this path, localhost 9001, we will run into errors. It won't work. Simply, it won't find public URL, and there'll be a lot of issues. So if you go to the terminal, you'll see that there are some compile errors first. Let's fix them. Right now, we are not using any loader for CSS. I do have CSS file in my project, and that's why I need to fix this. If you do not have CSS file, which I find hard to believe, but in case you don't have, you can completely skip this step. What do we need? We need a loader called CSS loader that we are going to use in our project. So before we do that, let's install CSS loader in dependencies. Once this is done, we will also configure this in our webpack.js file. Once CSS loader is installed, we need to add another rule over here. Simply copy the above rule and make some changes. Here, instead of JS, JSX, we need CSS. We ignore node modules. For loader, we are going to use CSS loader. All right, let's try and start the server once again and see what happens over here. This built successfully. Let's go and check if it works. I'm going to refresh this. Okay, it didn't work perfectly. There are no errors or warnings in the console, but you do see that it is not able to resolve the public URL. So if I'll just zoom in, you see that console shows public URL not found, and it is not able to fetch manifest.json. That's the next step. Let's fix it now. So basically what happens, webpack is not able to resolve this percentage sign in the index.html file in your public folder. We need to add some plugins that will provide this support for us. Go back to webpack config.js and you see there is no plugin that we are using right now. We will install HTML webpack plugin and interpolate HTML plugin that will help us to resolve this issue. So let's quickly install in dev dependency HTML webpack plugin and interpolate HTML plugin. Now go back to your VS Code. We are going to make some changes over there. One thing to notice is that I've added mode is development, because right now we are trying to set up our webpack for development mode. We'll do it for production as well, but first let's concentrate on development, set everything for our dev mode to work, and then we focus on production. Okay, so make sure that you have mode set. Then what is missing? Here we are going to import those plugins and then we are going to use them in the configuration. So simply add some name for interpolate HTML plugin. I'm trying to be meaningful. You can use it as you like. And then add require interpolate HTML plugin. And the same goes for HTML webpack plugin. Right. One more thing that you will need is a variable that is pointing to your public URL. We are going to read it from environment variable if it is available. If not, then we'll provide a default value, which will be empty in our case. Once this is done, let's add those plugins. This is going to be an array of the plugins we just added. So new interpolate HTML plugin, I made a minor mistakes because this is an array. This is going to be like this, and here we are going to set the public URL as the parameter we just wrote on the top, and then we'll also initialize HTML plugin. This takes template. By default, we point it to the index.html in our public directory, and the other parameter that it takes is file name, which points to the index.html file in the current directory. Let's save it, go back to the terminal and see what happens. When you will run npm start, it will end up in another error, React is not defined. This is easy to fix. Go back to your Babel RC file and set our presets correctly. So basically, instead of just preset React, we are gonna pass another parameter called runtime. It can be automatic, its value can be automatic or classic. Automatic covers mostly all the functionality, so we are going to use that. Save it, run your service again, serve the webpack, And okay, cool. I know this doesn't look like it works, but it does. Why this error? I'm gonna quickly show you. Go back to the code. I'm using process.env variables in my code. Let's comment them. I know it is very useful to understand how to fix this error, because we do use processor environment variable for API keys for security purposes, and we will fix that. But before that, I want to show you that the current configuration in development just works if we are not using process.env. So you see, our localhost deployment is done and successful. In the next video, we'll talk about how to fix this process error, and we'll also set up the webpack for production. So keep watching, click on the next video. Tell me if this helped you really. I hope it does, and subscribe for more. Thank you.